Hello, everybody. Welcome to Unit 5, Day 2. Today, we're going to be talking about the causes of the Civil War and actually the sequence of events that would lead us into war. So when we're talking about the causes of the Civil War, generally people boil it down to just the one cause of slavery. And you're going to see when we talk about the multiple causes of the Civil War, slavery is really intertwined with all of the reasons. So that's why a lot of people like to generalize it and say, hey, slavery was the reason for the war. But when you're looking at the Civil War as a whole, it's going to be more than just about slavery, although that is going to be the major issue that is going to lead to the conflict between the North and the South. So I like to boil it down to the three S's. Number one, slavery. Slavery had been that issue since the very beginning, the Constitutional Convention between North and South, even going back to the Declaration of Independence. Slavery had been an issue in this country. So slavery. Two, sectionalism. You had two parts of the country that were very, very different economically and very, very different even culturally. And those two sides had animosity against each other. And I think because of that sectionalism and those two very different groups that you have there, that is a large part of the conflict that you're going to have there, is just a simple lack of understanding of Northerners of Southerners and of Southerners of Northerners. And I'll say you even see some of that today in our culture, where people in the North don't exactly understand people in the South, and maybe vice versa as well. So sectionalism, and then you're going to have states' rights as well. Is it the right of a state to secede from the Union? Is it the right of a state to nullify a law that they don't like? We bring up that idea of nullification, which we had seen before during the nullification crisis when Andrew Jackson was presidency, or even going back to John Adams' presidency when the whole idea of nullification was created by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison in the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. So this whole idea of what are a state's rights? Can they nullify laws? What can a state do regarding slavery and that kind of thing? So those are the three S's that I like to say with the causes of the Civil War. Keep all of those in mind. And again, of course, slavery is going to be that major driving issue of a lot of that. So that brings us to the election of 1860. Abraham Lincoln wins because of the split in the Democratic Party. He is able to easily win. Now, Lincoln promises after his election that he says he wants the country to stay together, and he says, I am not going to touch slavery in the areas where it already is. So the areas that already had slaves, said, I'm not going to touch those areas, but I am not for the extension of slavery. And that's part of the reason why the Republicans actually picked him as a candidate, is because he had more of a compromise type view in relation to slavery versus more radicals within the Republican Party who wanted to destroy slavery completely. So Lincoln makes that promise. Unfortunately for him, Southerners believed that the Republican Party, again, wanted to completely destroy slavery and take away their rights. And so that is why South Carolina would meet, and South Carolina would be the first state to pass an ordinance of secession. And again, it's interesting, South Carolina being the first. After we talked about, 30 years before this, South Carolina had been the ones to stand up to President Andrew Jackson and have conflict with him. So South Carolina secedes from the Union, and that is going to lead other lower South states to do the same thing as well. Now, you might be wondering, well, what about Virginia and the upper South? Well, those states, interesting, because at this point, they weren't actually ready to secede. The voter population, representatives were not in the place to secede. And you're going to see in a place like Virginia, because at this time, Virginia still included Virginia and then what would become West Virginia, you're going to have a big split between the state. And I even show you that in here when it shows the two different votes on secession in Virginia. You're going to see in a lot of the more rural areas, the mountainous areas, places where there was not a large number of slaves or slave owners, that people didn't want to secede from the Union. They wanted to stay with the Union or at least remain neutral in the conflict. They didn't want to really take sides in that. So that is why the upper South, you're going to have a whole lot more of that in places like Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, these areas that decide not to secede and actually vote against secession. Now, what is going to change that? Fort Sumter, that is what is going to change that. Fort Sumter, a little fort in Charleston Harbor there, obviously a federal fort. At this time, though, it is in part of the new Confederate States of America, which has been created of these lower South states that has seceded. So after months of negotiations between the two sides, really, obviously, the South said, the Confederate States said, hey, your soldiers and everybody, they need to get out of the fort. Eventually, though, the talking doesn't work, and the Confederates start firing on Fort Sumter. No one in Fort Sumter is killed, but the fort does fall to the Confederacy. And really, if anything, this is going to be the big thing that leads, or this is going to be the start of the war. That's why that's the first battle of the war. So finally now we're in a place where war is here. It's happening. So with that, Lincoln does a couple things. One, he issues a call for 75,000 volunteers to put down the rebellion in the Cotton States, is what he calls it. And the second thing he would do is a suspension of habeas corpus. Habeas corpus basically is the idea that you can't be arrested and just held indefinitely by the federal government. That violates the Constitution and the whole idea of habeas corpus. So that's why if you ever watch shows maybe like a Law and Order or police shows, often they'll talk about like, hey, we've got 24 hours to charge this person before we have to let them go. And they're doing that so that they don't violate the principle of habeas corpus. So why did Lincoln suspend habeas corpus then? His reasoning behind that was he was worried about the pro-Confederate sentiment that was happening from D.C. to Philadelphia, and especially in Maryland, where Maryland was looking very much like it was going to be turned over, or that the legislature was going to vote to join the Confederacy. So Lincoln actually had many members of the Maryland legislature imprisoned in order to keep Maryland from voting to go with the Confederacy, because if Maryland did that, then Washington, D.C. would be surrounded by Confederate states, and obviously you don't want to be surrounded by your enemy. Even with Maryland not seceding, you're going to see Maryland would be a hotbed of pro-Confederate activity throughout the entire Civil War. So would the city of D.C., in fact, and you'll see John Wilkes Booth and his conspirators all lived right in Washington, D.C. there, and planned Lincoln's assassination actually there during that time. So yeah, Lincoln does that, suspends habeas corpus. Eventually, the Supreme Court would tell him that it was unconstitutional. He continued it, though, through the end of the war. And many people use as an example of Lincoln violating the Constitution during this time. Later on, during World War II, you'd have FDR basically do the same thing when he imprisons Japanese Americans during World War II. So that happens. So what is the effect of Lincoln's call for 75,000 troops? This is really going to be the tipping point for the upper South states. You'll actually see in the slides I put in there, I think it's April 4th, would be the first time that it actually comes to a vote, the Ordinance of Secession here in Virginia, and that would be, it would lose the first time. We would not vote to secede at that time. Now, April 17th, Virginia would vote to secede from the Union, and in large part it's going to be because of that call to put down the rebellion in the Cotton States with the 75,000 volunteers. I put in there April 16th response that the governor of Virginia, Governor Letcher, actually sent to the Secretary of War at the time, telling him, we're not going to send a Virginia militia to fight. And he says in it, you have chosen to inaugurate civil war. And that's going to be the feeling of a lot of people. They may have not agreed with secession, but they also didn't agree with the whole idea of sending troops in to do something by force. Robert E. Lee, who go on to become the famous Confederate general, he would be offered the generalship of the Union Army by Abraham Lincoln, and he would turn that down. Even though he opposed secession, he would turn it down because he said, I can't fight against my home state of Virginia, but also he disagreed with the whole idea of sending troops into the South to enforce what the federal government wanted to do during this time. So Virginia secedes from the Union, and we are officially in a state of war during this time. Now, you're going to see that in the coming months after April, the Confederate capital would move to Richmond, Virginia, Richmond being one of the more industrial cities during that time. plus Richmond close to the eastern seaboard, so on and so forth. They would move there. The Confederacy would elect Jefferson Davis, a former senator and former Secretary of War himself, to be the president of the Confederacy. Also, the Confederacy, if you look at their government, it's basically word for word the U.S. Constitution with a few changes there that would take away powers from the Confederate federal government. It would take away like tariff powers from the federal government. Basically, the issues that the Confederacy, the southern states had with the North, with tariffs and slavery and that kind of thing, would be the things that would be included or put hands off in the Confederate Constitution there. So you have that. So what is the goal for each side in the war? Really, the South wanted independence, and the South knew that the best way to get independence would be to, secure like a stalemate in the war. Maybe if the war dragged on for a long time, that would also lead Northerners to get tired of the war and give them independence. Lincoln's goal was unconditional surrender. He did not acknowledge the secession states. Basically, Lincoln's view of it was that the southern states never actually seceded, that the southern states had put in place these governments that had seceded, and so that they had never actually seceded itself. I know that's kind of difficult to understand. Remember, Lincoln was a lawyer, so he thought like a lawyer, and so that's how he viewed things. And we'll talk more about that when we're talking about the end of the war and how his viewpoint on the states and seceded states, what effect that would have on his Reconstruction plans. So that was the goal. That builds up, and eventually in July of 1861, you were going to have the first major battle of the Civil War be fought. That is going to be fought in Manassas, Virginia, which is about 30 miles outside of Washington, D.C. Now, again, just to show you how much the North and South disagreed, you'll actually hear it called the Battle of Bull Run or the Battle of Manassas. And North and South actually didn't agree on naming conventions for the war, for the battles. The South tended to name battles after the closest town. The North tended to name battles after the closest geographic feature. So if you go to Manassas battlefield, you'll notice that Bull Run Creek runs through it. That's why the North called it the Battle of Bull Run. As far as what we call the battles in this class, we'll use the naming convention that the National Park Service uses. The National Park Service basically goes with whatever side won that battle. That's the name that sticks for the battle. And again, not all of the battles you're going to see, there's a difference in names and that kind of thing. But some of them there are, again, Manassas, Bull Run being one of them. So, but at Battle of Manassas, basically, you're having two armies that are coming into this that are very green. And green by military speak means they didn't have military experience. They didn't have all the training that they needed. So you're going to see the Battle of Manassas is kind of just a mess for both sides. But the Confederacy would prevail in this battle. And you're going to see in the battle, the Union, I put in there a little video for you. Union's going to hear the rebel yell for the first time. I mentioned that especially because you're going to see in a lot of the early writings and stuff that the Union Army mentions they hated hearing the sound of the rebel yell, that it was kind of almost like demoralizing and scary to them. You're also going to have in this battle Thomas Jonathan Jackson earned the name Stonewall Jackson, when in the middle of the battle, he encourages and rallies the Virginia Army to get back in the battle and fight. That would eventually be the push that would give the Confederates the victory in this battle. And so you'll see Stonewall Jackson gets his name. Now, this battle and the fact that the South was able to win it shocked everybody. You had actually had observers come from Washington, D.C. to watch the battle because they expected, hey, this is going to be a quick battle. The Union Army is going to win, and then this whole secession thing will be done with. Nope, that's not what happened at all. And you're going to see that going throughout the war here, that one of the big advantages that the South would have for much of the war is just better generalship. And that's going to be on display here in the first Battle of Manassas as well. And you're going to see a lot of things that go into prolonging this war and making it turn into the 4 to 5 year war that it did turn into. So that's where we're going to stop today, is with the Battle of Manassas and Stonewall Jackson getting his nickname. And really, like I said, this is going to be the point of view where I think a lot of people fighting on both sides are going to realize this isn't going to be a short war. This is going to be a long war. It's going to be a very bloody war as these things go. And that is ultimately what it turned out to be. Now, I think I've told you guys before that I really enjoy learning about the Civil War. Part of the reason I enjoy learning about it is because when I was a kid, that's what we did. We went to Civil War battlefields on family vacations and that kind of stuff. Another thing, my family history with the Civil War. I had family members on both my mom and my dad's side that fought in the Civil War. All of them fought for the Confederacy. Again, my family is from Virginia. And on my dad's side, direct descendant of me, so it would be my great-great-grandfather, William Taylor Gibbs. He and his two brothers, who were all tobacco farmers, small-time tobacco farmers, so small, in fact, they didn't have any slaves on their farm. But you're going to see William Taylor, his two brothers, would actually go and sign up to fight in the Confederate Army on April 17th, 1861, which is also the same day that Virginia seceded from the Union. William Taylor, my great-grandfather, he would go on to survive the war. He would be part of the Army of Northern Virginia. With that, he would fight in the Battle of Gettysburg and take part in Pickett's Charge there, and some other big battles from the Civil War he would be part in. His older brother and then younger brother that fought, both of them would die as a result of the war. One of them would be killed in the 7 Days battles outside of Richmond, and then the other one, he would actually die of disease in a hospital in Richmond during the war, which we'll jump more into talking about the war, specifics of the war next class. So with today, you got a couple things you got to do. One of them, a POV activity, point of view activity on your views on the Civil War and what the name of the Civil War should actually be. And then the second one, you're going to go ahead and as a preview for tomorrow, I'm going to have you make a timeline of the Civil War there. So sorry this video is so long. I generally don't like to go this long with the videos, but as you can tell, I'm very passionate about the Civil War, and there's a lot of stuff that you need to know building up to that. So if you have any questions, as always, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a fantastic day.